Kwesi, your general thoughts and impressions about the nominations that have come through so far.
Well, I think the first thing is to recognize that the new president, has kept one of his promises. And that promise was that within 14 days of his being sworn in, his cabinet would be ready. He would have nominated his cabinet for ministerial, for parliamentary approval. And that promise has been kept. The second promise, which has not been kept yet, and I'm not saying that it's been broken, we are still in the process of receiving nominations for ministerial appointment. Mm-hmm. And everybody is waiting with bated breath to see whether or not he will keep his promise of appointing not more than 60 ministers.
Right.
That should include regional ministers, sectorial ministers, and deputy ministers. So far, I think that he's appointed about 42 ministers.
42.
So there's still some way to go. 18 more to go. Excuse me. The indication clearly is that not all the ministries will have deputies. And the suspicion is that the regional ministers would not have deputies. Now, if he's able to keep that promise, I would say that that would be a feather in his cap, whatever that means. If he's unable to keep that promise, it will raise very, very serious questions about his commitment to the manifesto that he used for the elections and so on. But already, we are seeing across the country protests. Protests. From his own constituency, young people are supposed to have gone, reported to have gone on the street to protest against the fact that their member of parliament has not received a ministerial position.
Yeah.
We are also told about incidents in Ho West and other areas. I think it should be clear to all of us, including the protesting young people, that it is not possible to make the 275 members of parliament all ministers, or if you take those on the president's side, more than 180 members of parliament, ministers. It is impossible. So some MPs would not be ministers. And that is no fault of the president, it's no fault of anybody. They simply cannot be ministers. And people ought to accept that. Besides, there are various roles that everybody can play. Collins, even in NPP, can play a role in the national development effort. You can play a role. So many roles to be played. You don't have to be a minister to make a contribution to the national development effort. And I think that message ought to go out clearly. There are so many people who have contributed so significantly to the development of this country that were never ministers and would never become ministers. Every 28th February, we celebrate Sergeant Ajete. He was not a minister. You understand? We celebrate Tete Kwashi. He was not a minister. There are so many people that we celebrate, who are not ministers, who would never become ministers. And there's a lot of room for every Ghanaian, no matter where they are, to contribute to the national development effort. And I think that we should understand this very clearly. The other thing that actually troubles me is this position that ministers, when a minister is appointed, is a community or a certain group which is appointed to that ministerial position. It's not true. You understand? It's not true at all. And I've said repeatedly, in spite of the provisions in the National Constitution, that I don't care if tomorrow morning all the ministers of Ghana come from the Ashanti region. I don't care. For as long as they do their work, for as long as they work so hard to take us out of the situation of bankruptcy and ensure that our people have access to social services like health, like education, and so on. For as long as, the values of equity and so on are upheld, I have no problem about the ethnic origins of ministers. I have no problem about, those things. I've always insisted that we should begin to show signs that we want to include women in the management of national affairs. It's symbolic, symbolic in some sense. But beyond the symbolism is also the fact that the denial of women's participation in the national development effort means that more than 50% of the population will be excluded from that process.
Right.
So it is not just symbolic, it is also an absolute necessity. So the National Democratic Congress put up a woman as the vice presidential candidate. I think it is commendable, she's capable, and so on. But I want to see that also expressed at all the different levels. And there are so many women in Ghana who can be ministers, who can be chief executives, and so on. They are qualified. You're not doing them a favor. They are qualified. We are tapping into their strengths and so on for the national development effort. So I like to see a lot more women.
In fact, as if just to take, sorry for taking the wind out of your sails. In fact, the women's groups have already started complaining, and they've already done the maths, and they're saying that so far, based on the appointments that have been made, we're looking about 17% women representation, and that's not good enough, especially when the president had promised.
No, that's better than
what existed in the past. So we made some progress.
No, not what existed in the past.
Okay.
That's better than when I saw the transitional teams from the two parties.
It was only one woman.
I mean, I was really shocked. Both parties. Each party presented only one woman, the initial transitional team. And I said, what is happening to Ghana? You have a population with more than 50% is made up of women. And you set up a transitional team, and there are only two women, one from NPP and one from NDC. I was really horrified, by that development. I'm hoping that the selection, the choice of Professor Nana Jane Opoku-Agyeman, would not just be symbolic and so on, but would actually have meaning and would find expression in opening the gates, for a lot more women.
As she herself has said.
Yeah, for a lot more women to participate in the national development effort.